Thank you very much. And I have to tell that this is a sub-chapter of my newly published book. And as I learned, it will be translated into Czech. Actually, two of my books will be merged together and will be published by the end of the year. Okay. So, Amorous Nation, I would like to speak first about the heroes. So, heroes who are in the core of, many charismatic construction of collective identity, like religion, like father of the nation, leaders of the nation. So, originates in Greek history, and then it is connected to extraordinary deed of an individual. So what was the characteristic of hero? We have to speak a little bit about heroes because the people I will speak about will fall in love with heroes, of course. So exceptionalism, very important. And they embodies the charisma and they fuse the sacred into the profane world. Okay, 19th century, this heroism was withdrawn from the private virtues and was limited to the public realm. Connoted mostly with men, where women were relegated to a symbolic role in the construction of nationalism. This is just a brief intro. Now let's see how heroes and gender relations in socialism look like when, on the level of rhetoric, at least the women question was solved and the women were emancipated. So, I would like to show two pictures. Jasmine Otumba's new book, which just came out entitled I Am Jugoslavenska, very entertaining, very good book, I could suggest you, elaborates on works that go against the default understanding of the body of the nation as the male body. In Sanja Iveković collage, it is a sketch actually to the performance. It is written on the upper right, sketch to a performance, which could be done in office, in schools, any other places. So this is just a sketch for that. And the title is He Looks at Me All the Time. It was done in 1979. So as we can see, the portrait of Tito, he is a middle-aged man, a quite young man. And it is her bedroom. Tumbas argues that Iveković, now quote, was not an opponent of socialism per se, but rather was disenchanted with the patriarchal erasure of women and their agency in the Yugoslav project. In her reading, the piece also suggests a libidinal relationship between Yugoslav socialism, promises for women, and in this the blanket positioned like a proletarian flag. Its horizontal use exacerbates the failings of horizontally oriented egalitarianism of socialism, unable to protect women from patriarchal invasion and sexualization. The flag itself becomes an erotic symbol, instrumentalized to sexualize women in the name of socialist ideology. And here is an important statement for us, which decreed that its citizens owed their bodies to the states, the revolution, and their leaders. Concerning Tito himself, she characterizes him as father of the people, was also libidinally heteronormative, a potent, domineering symbol of national masculinity, for women to desire and for men to never fully attain. So this quote ends. Thus, in this structure, Tito is not just the embodiment of hyper-masculinity and the alpha male of the nation, high above all other men, but also the irresistible object of desire of women. However, despite the huge age gap between the twosome, the middle-aged flesh and blood man and the young woman, hardly out of her puberty, drawn in the manner of children's doing, does not evoke the Lolita phenomenon. The young woman is not a seducer, quite the opposite. She is frightened, scared of the dominance of the powerful man and of the potentiality of violence and rape. To protect herself, she pulls the flag decorated with hammer and sickle on herself as a blanket, by which she opposes the rhetoric of women's emancipation and the realization of socialist project as a masculine enterprise. The work allows us yet another reading in which Tito is the omnipotent father of the nation in the bedroom of a female compatriot. We are confronted with the hidden fantasy of populating the motherland, even against the taboo of incest. In her work, Ivekovic goes beyond the socialist rhetoric and unmasks the gender construction of the lived socialism, which could not eliminate its hierarchical and submissive nature despite its rhetoric. In the work of Marina Abramović, made in the socialist time, there is no trace of love, erotic or sexual desire towards Yugoslavia or Tito. Tito is not present, by my knowledge, according to my knowledge, in her oeuvre until 2004. Almost quarter a century after the death of Tito, and at the beginning of her international and especially American career, the photo made this photo which entitled Portrait with Tito. Her half-naked body is partly covered with the portrait of Tito as a young man in uniform. The thigh of the powerful man gets to the place of the genitalia of the woman artist, while her legs extend the male bust, holding together the body of the leader, who looks like walking on stilts or as a puppet with woman's leg. Deprived from his masculinist ego, his sexuality is ambivalent. At the beginning of Abramovic's American career, when not just Yugoslavia, but even the bloody Balkan War was forgotten, she smuggled back Yugoslavia into her oeuvre in a different way as well. In the next year, in 2005, she had her first solo show, Balkan Erotic Epic, in Chelsea. As Tumbas interprets this exhibition, it marked the artist's libidinal ties to Yugoslavia. As the artist herself explains, she attempted to counter the negative and hostile relationship to Balkan sexuality. Actually, I happened to be in New York in that time and visited the exhibition and perceived it totally differently. It was rather a sensationalist quasi-pornographic work addressed especially to the American audience with its inherited prudery. While it intended to subvert stereotype of Balkan sexuality, in my opinion, it rather built on them and aroused erotic feelings towards the orientalized other. She hired porn stars to reenact pagan rituals from the Balkan to make the earth fertile by naked male actors ejaculating into the soil and women massaging their bare breast. The local PC politics was also considered, since among the men, people with color were also involved. While the work might allow the reading of making love with the motherland, quote, in order to tame the earth and reconnect with nature, as Abramović explained, in my understanding, the dominant reading is not the stirred libidinal sentiment towards Yugoslavia, supported by the fact that from that very moment when her international career was launched, the thematic of her locality and the ideology almost entirely disappears from her artistic activity. Thus, I regard the work as a stepping stone of her international career, which actually worked out very well. Yet, the double portrait could be still considered subversive, but on the other way, not on the way as Tumbas described. I believe on the other way around. I argue that this is not the confession, we will be back to this back. This is not the confession of love towards the leader of ex-Yugoslavia, but more likely the moment of breakup with the leader, a visual manifesto of the end of a love affair, which also signals the end of an era in the artist's life. The Superman is deprived from its power, feminized, and trapped in a passive role. On the top of that, as the female genitalia is the symbol of prostitution and as such often an abject element in the patriarchal iconography, these meanings are projected onto the representation of hegemon masculinity. We are witnessing a change of role, namely that the woman is the domina. She holds the leader of the nation tightly in her hands. He is totally paralyzed and needs the assistance of the woman's leg being able to move. This is not a confession of love, it is a visual breakup letter. The message is that she freed herself from the power of socialist patriarchy and left behind everything which is connected to it, which actually corresponds perfectly with the next phases of her artistic career. Leaders of the national states who can be in love with them. A short representation, a short introduction to the leader in nationalism. In the self-definition of the nation, the hero has also extraordinary role embodying the essence of the spirit of the nation as an exemplum virtutis. He is exceptional, unique, elevated above the everyday reality, located in between earthly and divine principium. In the operation of heroism, the physical and spiritual distance is an absolute necessary. If the distance is eliminated, the unique aura is evaporating. The reason that Krista Nagy made a huge iconostas containing 57 portraits of Viktor Orban, as she explains, quote, "The Prime Minister sleeps in our bed, he is in our table cover." So she feels as if she has no other option as a painter than paint the leader on bed sheets and on table covers. The subject matter is high profile, identifiable, and this is a found image. It was made during the election in 2014, and the message next to the portrait is that we are sending words to Brussels. Hungarians demand respect. So, which means that the national pride and the leader bravely talking back to the powerful like a scamp, or as in the fairy tale hero, is represented as the main text of a charismatic leader. The series is entitled Portrait Painter for Hire. So what is happening here in this series? The uniqueness of heroism totally disappears by the repetition. The profane and human details like the bed cover, like the bed sheet and table covers also works against the uniqueness. So heroism fades away in the routines of every day like sleeping, eating, and exceptionalism of the hero is also beyond the routine. So it loses its distinctive value, inflates. His value is inflated. The method of nationalism also appropriated, because nationalism also works on repetition and redundancy. He is everywhere and watches us, as we remember, Sanja Ivekovic also dealt with this effect. So there is a suffocating feeling of having no privacy. By the method of cloning, the individuality vanishes and turns out to be a cliché, a pattern. Actually, she names the individual paintings as pattern. There is no environment, no perspective. The background and the subject of the painting totally homogenized. The face is part of the decorum. surface and image totally identical, like the pattern of the bed sheet. So all those, the overused image turns into banality. As opposed to the classical portrait, which is supposed to compress the most important characteristic of the subject, here we can see not even one true face. Or which is it? They are not portraits, they are just heads, they are decaptivated. We could say about that it is almost like a product of the assembly line and empties out, it will be sterile, like a puppetry, a paper doll to dress up. Nationalism, speaking a bit about nationalism, is essentially a masculinist enterprise, and Christa Nagy feminizes the figure of the absolute power when paint his portraits on material with female connotation like bed sheets and tablecloths. The contours of the stable gender position became blurred in the very same way as on Warhol's Marilyn portraits and also on Mao portraits. Warhol followed the method of the advertisement in the time of prosperity, abundance of goods, and euphoria of commodity capitalism in the US. His repeated portraits of Mao are freshly got out from the assembly lines, are gutless, sterile mass products. Concerning the Orbán portraits, they are realistic and abstract at the same time. His subjects are ready-made household names. In their multiplied large doses, they became ambivalent and oscillating between appreciation and parody and adoration and mockery. It is the same method, so it was actually on Mao and Christa, in the very same way as Christa Nagy's series, also balancing between this appreciation and parody, despite the local reception which saw only adoration in them. The clever gesture of Orbán Viktor's wife buying a portrait of her husband contributed to this reading. However, I argue that the work is balancing between the two extremes. Warhol, about pop art, used to say it is liking things. Reading Christa Nagy from this position, the chilly-billy portraits could be the manifestation of the Stockholm Syndrome, which is a coping mechanism to a captive or abusive situation. People develop positive feelings towards their captors or abusers over time. So she has fallen in love with the president. And in this, Viktor Orbán is eroticized. And if he is eroticized, he loses his power, becomes commodity, displayed as a good on the shelves. Warhol, in his interview, frequently declared that he wanted to become a machine, eliminating personal touch. Jennifer Dyer regards Warhol an icon maker, in whose iconophilia, to which belongs the huge quantity of images made by patterns, ex nihilo effect, frontality, motionlessness, simplicity, empty space, timelessness, meant to take over sacrality and substitute with the everyday and fetishizing the mundane object, according to the 60s in the US, when pop culture gained iconic status. In the series of Christa Nagy, it is the politics, a politician, that substitutes sacrality in the very same way as in the socialist time, due to the lack of consumer society, politics substituted commodities in the East Central European version of pop art. Thomas Crow detected critical voices in the Warhol series, stating that his choice of images is not arbitrary, but very much conscious. He forced his audiences to take sides. He relied on ambivalence and thus left open the perception, and I believe this is the same effect with Krista Nagy. So now the third chapter is whose love is unwelcome in the nation state. Concept of masculinity and nationalism emerged at about the same time. Georg Mosse connects nationalism to the rise of modern bourgeois society. Division of labor was necessary of bourgeois society, and not only in economics, but in social and sexual life as well. The roles of sexes had to be redefined very strictly, and new standards had to be established. So Georg Mosse names this something in which this division of labor and the new standard is defined, respectability. Respectability, which is a bourgeois value and means a control over male sexual passion. So what does that mean, this control? That the sexual passion transformed into higher purposes, namely a devotion to duty. So why was it so important? It legitimized and defined the bourgeoisie against the lower classes and also against the aristocracy. So nationalism, in nationalism, this control worked by redirecting man's passion to higher purposes like leadership of the nation and the society. Distinction between normality and abnormality, which was a basic for modern respectability, was discussed in medical terms. So homosexuals, Jews, races were defined as belonging to abnormality because they threatened the social order and standard of behavior. So the antithesis of manliness was degeneration and deviance. Manliness meant normalcy, and any kind of sexual intoxication was viewed as unmanly and antisocial. Who can't control passion was considered abnormal. So the national and middle class stereotypes were identical. Masculinity provided the norm for the society, and the signals had to be very clear and unambiguous, because loss of boundaries meant the threat of chaos and loss of control. So now I would like to show this video. I'm sorry, I forgot to put it here. So I wanted to show for you this national passion, a video worked by Matej Kamiński, a Slovakian artist. And as you can see, it is very disturbing, especially on the video. He goes around in Bratislava and makes a love affair with the statues of national heroes, as a sexual game, and also very erotic touch. So the video is quite disturbing because it represents all the stereotypes connected to homosexuality. Lack of control over passion. Lust, sexual excess. As Mosse writes, exhaustion, fatigue meant nervousness. So outsiders and insane pictured in constant motion. Moral and physical disorder, the sign of moral and physical disorder is this weakness and absence of will. So he does not respect the common courtesy in relation to heroes of the nation either. The work is subversive in relation to monuments and nationalism because the sacredness and distance is totally eliminated. Sexlessness is also eliminated. And then asexual heroes are sexualized and pull back to the profane and human world. If we are speaking about this national passion, this is a tragic, one-sided, platonic love. But at the same time, it also makes visible a minority and demands agency in the public space. Okay. Thank you very much.